Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's member presentation by Motorsport Australia. I'm Margot Foster and your MC for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, all 430 of you, as we look forward to some interesting presentations from our President, Andrew Fraser, our CEO, Eugene Roca, and our CFO, Charlotte Hayes. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting here in Canterbury tonight, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and invite you to acknowledge the lands on which you are situate at this time. Today's presentation will commence with from Andrew Fraser, our President, followed by Eugene Roca, our CEO, who will give an overview of the year that was, followed by Charlotte Hayes, our Chief Financial Officer, who will fill you in on the financial goings-on for the year that was. So after that, we will have questions, and we invite you to start typing your questions now or as soon as you feel you wish to. Please ask your questions through the Q&A section on your computer. Any general queries about your licence, events, logbooks, etc. will be dealt with separately, so please contact the membership team via the email and the phone number on your screen. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our President, Andrew Fraser. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Margot, and good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us tonight, and indeed thank you for the role that you play in our sport. I wanted to, in addition to Margot, acknowledge the other Vice President, Norm Gowers, who I know is joining us tonight, along with all the other directors of Motorsport Australia from around the country, and particularly wanted to welcome our new directors, John Gibbons, John Thompson and Samantha Reid, who are joining this event for the first time. This is the third time that we've conducted this event, this report back to you as the members. It's important to say that this is not something that we're required to do by any rule or law, but it's something that we seek to do in order to provide an opportunity to give you insight into the outcomes for the sport in the last year and indeed the financial performance of the organisation, as well as the opportunity for you to ask questions directly of us, both the board and management representatives. This event takes place after we've signed off the audited financial accounts for the year, which took place last year. They're now published on the web and have been lodged with ASIC and the Sports Commission. Again, an important part of our transparency as an organisation. I wanted to mention tonight that we've also published our new strategic plan as we look ahead to the future. Shortly, Huge will talk about the outcomes of the sport over the last 12 months and the strong build back from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on our sport. And Charlotte will talk about the build back of our finances. That's a story also of improved outcomes, obviously with still a number of challenges, but definitely an improvement in the trajectory of the sport as well as the sport's finances. If we look at the strategic plan that's going to guide us into the future, I wanted to emphasize a number of points. Obviously, it's focused on improving participation and increased participation, and that's about improving the experience for all participants in the sport. There's a number of key features to that, and we can't have any sport or any participation if we don't have a focus on new facilities, and that's certainly a large part of our focus as we look ahead to the next couple of years. It takes a long time to get new facilities up and running, and we can't do it alone. So whether it's working with people like Tony Quinn at QR in Queensland, or the new Drive-It facility outside Townsville, or indeed the announcement of working with the Victorian government on a proposal for a new facility at Avalon, as well as other facilities for other disciplines, those are the sort of things where we need to work with people to ensure that our sport has a future. A key part of looking to the future also is to think about the way that we can use technology to improve both the way that participants engage in our sport, but also the data and feedback that we're able to collect to make sure that we can run the sport as efficiently as possible, which is a key obligation for us as we look to the future. I also wanted to mention that looking towards our sustainability, both in an environmental sense and more broadly, is an expectation upon us from governments and corporate partners, and something which we are looking to focus on, as well as the ability to see new parts of the sport, including esports, where we want to make sure that the service we provide in traditional forms of the sport, which we all love, can be replicated in those areas of the future. If I look to the challenges and opportunities as we chart a course for the future of Motorsport Australia, you can see the strong interest in events like the Grand Prix conducted here in Melbourne last month. And the opportunity there is to make sure that we welcome that interest into the sport. We welcome people from all walks of life. A great example of that is the FIA Girls on Track program that we hosted at the Grand Prix, a great way where we bring people from all different backgrounds, different ages, different genders into the sport. But the one thing I wanted to emphasise tonight was you can expect from us a real focus on officials in the year ahead. The opportunity to make sure that the training for our officials is enhanced and is appropriate, and the opportunity for people to get the opportunity to be an official, and indeed the opportunity to serve in particular leadership roles. As a sport, we've had the benefit of a number of people who've contributed their experience over a number of years, long-serving people who've served in official roles in a volunteer capacity right around the country, and that's been important. But it's also important that we provide pathways and opportunities for others to get an opportunity to serve in those roles, to provide for new blood, and to make sure that the next generation of officials is there to take our sport into the future. And you can expect to hear more from that on that front in the coming 12 months, and we'll be reporting back 12 months henceforth. Now, I'll leave my remarks there. I really do look forward to answering your questions in a short while, but I'll hand back to Margot. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for your leadership during the year. I'd just like to suggest to everybody that you have a look at the strategic plan recently uploaded onto the website. It takes all of us to make it happen, and members, you're most welcome to have a look and see what you think. So thank you. And now to our CEO, Eugene Rocca, who'll provide the overview of 2022, the year that was.
Thank you, Margot. And as already mentioned by Margot and Andrew, I'd like to thank our members for joining us tonight, but also for the support we receive from our membership throughout all of the work we do, and we're very grateful for that. I'm going to touch on some brief highlights and then show you some graphs that will sort of back up the information I'm giving you. But the headline for us is that we're starting to get back to some normality with our licences and event permits, and I think that's always a good indicator as to where we are tracking. So I guess the first point I want to emphasise is that things are starting to look up and the numbers are improving. Not quite at 2019 levels, but very, very, very encouraging. Andrew mentioned officials development. This is a really important part of what we do and how we do it. And we believe there's a real opportunity over the next 12 months to invest heavily in ensuring that we're capturing the opportunity that's being presented by the popularity of the sport, which is at record levels in terms of engagement. So the opportunity for us to capture that engagement, more officials, better engagement, more recruitment are all pretty important, very important to us. And you'll see over the coming months that there'll be more plans put out in terms of investing in that pathway and the opportunity for more people to get involved in the sport. Having mentioned that the numbers are tracking up, we cannot forget that the pandemic did have a major impact on our business and our operations and our events. And we are now starting to see that things are improving, but there are some challenges still around insurance and rising costs, and the state of the economy is also a factor that does impact on our sport because a lot of it's driven by disposable income. So we're keeping a careful eye on those costs, but we still are very encouraged by the trends we're seeing. A key part of how we're able to deliver our sport is venues, or our venues. And from the day that I started at Motorsport Australia, it was made clear to me that we needed to spend more time investing in finding more venues. We can't build them ourselves, but we can certainly work with government. And there's some encouraging work that's been done. We see Queensland Raceways come back into the fold. We note that Drive in Kew, North Queensland, is ready to cut the ribbon on a track that's been in development for some 8 years. And I guess to underline the amount of work that needs to be done by all people to get a track up and running, I remember meeting Greg Fitzgerald and Pat Driscoll way back in 2015. And now we're seeing 7 or 8 years later, the opportunity for us to issue a track licence on a track just outside of Townsville, which is fantastic. Andrew's also mentioned the Avalon project. Again, this has been a 4 or 5 year effort to date, and we're only at the start of a project in real terms. So we really are committed to finding more venues and supporting those that we have. That's really is illustrative of our ongoing government engagement, and we're particularly proud that over the last 3 years there's been record levels of funding for clubs and venues in Victoria. We're starting to see other states now follow, and South Australia's just opened a call for more funding opportunities, which we certainly intend to seize. And with the change of government in New South Wales, Andrew and I certainly hope to reach out to the new Sports Minister to see what can be done about supporting the biggest state of the country in terms of engagement with more tracks, given there's only really one track in that state at the moment. Piggybacking onto that has been the opportunity for us to engage more and more with parliamentarians of all sides, of all persuasions in terms of the politics. And late last year, we held a very successful first event as a parliamentary Friends of Motorsport in Queensland. It was well received with more than 40 parliamentarians turning up, listening to what we have to say about this wonderful sport, how popular it is, how the growth is really exponential and making big impacts, particularly in the regions. And I think it's a real opportunity for us to educate, lobby, work with government and see what sort of opportunities can come our way. Pleasingly, we've also done something similar in 2023 in Canberra with a federal parliamentary Friends of Motorsport. And these are bodies and groups that we intend to continue to work with moving forward as part of our overall objective to increase the popularity of our sport. Finally, I should mention, and I'll get to some graphs in a moment, but finally I should mention the tremendous amount of work that was done by the Targa Review Panel in response to some of the incidents that we had in Targa over the last 2 years. And Gary Connolly as chair, along with Matt Selly, who many of you would know, and of course the incomparable Neil Bates, did a power of work to come up with more than 90 recommendations to ensure that Targa rallying can continue into the future and be a vibrant part of our sport. We're going to work over the next few months, and pleasingly Adrian Coppen is now going to lead the implementation of those recommendations over the next few months, but we are very much committed to ensuring that Targa rallying continues in Australia into the future. So I'll briefly now turn to some graphs because they do give you a great visual representation of the sort of opportunity and the growth that's now happening over the last 12 months. And I guess event permits are really a fantastic indicator of where we're getting and where we're heading to. And you'll see from the graph that we've got there that over 3,000 events were permitted last year. That's just a touch under what we were doing in 2019, which was a record year. So that's very pleasing as an indicator that the work that we're doing in holding events is starting to bear fruit. The next slide will show you that active licences again through 20 and 21 obviously had a dip. And I want to mention that we actually didn't expect as many members not to renew. So we're pleased that whilst the drop was significant, it wasn't as bad as it could have been because a number of states were able to continue holding events throughout the pandemic. But in 2022, we're starting to see some positive growth, and that's now extending into 23. And you can see there that we're just a touch under 23,000, or just under 24,000. On the next slide, as I've mentioned and Andrew's mentioned, our officials are the lifeblood of our sport in terms of being able to participate and engage. And they are renewed on a 4-year cycle, and not surprisingly, in 20 and 21, with reduced events, a lot of officials did not renew, but we're now starting to see a sort of influx driven by those that have come back and those that are new to the sport. And you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, in the 22 year, we had over a 47% increase in the number of licences processed. And that's a really encouraging sign that is continuing into 2023. In the next slide, our car clubs, which again are a fundamental part of our membership. Behind the car clubs sit all of our members, and they are a vital part of our sport. And again, we're starting to see that trend move up over 560 in 2022, and we expect to increase on that in 2023. And with the changing insurance market, or the challenging insurance market, the opportunity for us to recruit more and more car clubs into our organisation is absolutely available to us. So we hope to keep doing work in that space. Next, I'll finish off on sort of an indicator of where 2023 is. And given it's only really a 3-month, these are records for 3 months, the first quarter, you can see that there's nearly 3% increase in both active officials licences and active competition licences. But really pleasingly, there's a 15% increase year on year on the number of events that we're permitting. And as I mentioned, events drive our sport. If there are no events, we don't get the chance to go out and enjoy ourselves. So well done to all the clubs and the promoters and the organisations that are driving our sport in that regard. And so it's a really positive way to finish off my part of the presentation. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Margot.
Oh, thanks, Huge. And I think we all agree that things are looking up, and some great numbers there in your presentation. And now to our CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Charlotte Hayes, who'll tell us about the year that was from the numbers perspective. Charlotte.
Thank you, Margot. So starting off, we've continued to maintain a strong balance sheet position, and you can see here we've got an increase in Motorsport Australia's retained earnings from year on year. Additionally, we have maintained a positive net current asset position. As we turn to the income statement, the revenue growth can be seen clearly, demonstrating the significant impact of the COVID-19 lockdowns on the motorsport activity across the country. And with a full or return to a full calendar of events comes the ability to generate revenue, along with the platform for our valued partners and sponsors to showcase their products and services at those events. On the other side of the equation, more events equals more expenses. So these costs aren't insignificant, and they include circuit and equipment hire, medical and emergency services, freight, and of course travel for our invaluable staff and appointed officials to attend events. So hence the corresponding increase in our expenses. The overarching result on paper for the group is a deficit position of 288,000. Is an improvement from this time last year, but we're not quite back in the black. However, the story presents slightly differently if we remove the impact of a one-off property sale along with depreciation, and additionally if we remove JobKeeper from 2020 and 2021. You recall JobKeeper had a huge impact on our ability to weather the storm of the pandemic, then the story shows a little bit more clearly. You can see here with our normalised EBITDA across the 4 years, the same 4 years, effectively Motorsport Australia's underlying operating performance. And we can see a surplus of around $314,000 after 2 years of understandable deficit. The next two charts will be somewhat familiar to those of you who've tuned in for the last couple of years. In terms of where income is generated, it's predominantly from licenses and event-related revenues. From an expense point of view, nearly 37% is in relation to participation and events, so being physical event costs, insurance, and travel. The insurance market does remain hard, which means increased costs of premiums, as you've probably experienced in your personal life, and Motorsport Australia is certainly not immune from this. While there has only been a marginal increase of the cost of insurance from 21 to 2022, unfortunately this has not been the case in 2023, and at this point it does feel prudent to tell you that the 2023 premiums have increased by over 40%. So in closing, 2022 was certainly a recovery year from a financial point of view, but we must continue to remain fiscally prudent throughout 2023 and beyond.
Thank you, Charlotte, as we track back to black, which is good signs. Thanks again to Andrew, Huge and Charlotte for their presentations at our third annual event. And now we turn to our questions and answers segment, the remainder of our time together tonight. I have some questions already, but if you have any others to add, please go to the Q&A button and submit them. So our first question is from Samantha Winter. Given Tarmac Rally events are now 3 months before recommencing Targa West and Targa TGBR in August, when will your members gain clarity on the implementation of the Targa Review Panel recommendations that the board accepted in February?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that question. And when you've got more than 90 recommendations to deal with and manage and implement, it's not an easy overnight task. I think the announcement of Adrian Coppin's appointment only in the last 24 hours is an indicator of the fact that we are going to accelerate this process. And to answer Samantha's question, I think over the next 2 months or so, people will start to see the implementation of those programs. And as I said, it's more than 90 of them, so there's a fair bit of work. We know that Targa West will be in September and then followed by other Targa events. Our expectation is to have those recommendations in place and operational from the 1st of July. That's the target we've set. We're dealing regularly with the stakeholders and the event promoters. They know the work that's being done or planned on being done, and they're pleasingly working with us to be able to achieve that. So hang in there, and we certainly expect to see Targa events come back in the second part of the year.
Thanks, Huge. Jeremy Cath asks, the strategic plan seems very light on actual measurable objectives and goals. How will you define success, especially around the topic of recruiting, training, retaining and promoting officials?
Thanks, Margot, and thanks, Jeremy, for the question. And it is a fair comment based on the published strategic plan. I guess what I would say is it's not unusual for organisations to publish strategic plans on their websites that are available, excuse me, to everyone, which don't necessarily include all the levels and layers of detail. What I can assure you is that beneath that there is a whole set of measures and KPIs that the board has put in place that we will be measuring against and that the board will monitor at its regular meetings in terms of report backs from management. I'm happy to take that as a pointer to reporting back on that particular point at this forum next year, because as I said in my opening remarks, our ability to be able to attract new officials and to provide the pathways for new officials is a real focus for us over the next 12 months. The need for us to focus on this area is evident. The need for us to have the next generation of officials skilled and trained in order to support the sport as we look ahead is a big priority, and so happy to take that feedback on board and report back in more detail at this event in 12 months' time.
Thanks, Andrew. From Scott Chammings, is there progress on IT improvements, especially in the area of digital penalty records and document management for senior officials? More and more senior officials are forced to pay for their own solutions that should be provided by Motorsport Australia systems.
A good question, and I guess when you're coming out of almost 3 years of revenue hits as a result of a pandemic, our capacity to invest in IT is somewhat restricted. Having said that, we are certainly on a journey around our digital transformation, and the improvement of event entry, the fact that we've now got digital licenses, and a promise, a commitment that permits, logbooks, and other elements of our sport will be online and through the IT system, if you want to call it that, including the documents. What we will say, however, is that we are still getting a lot of resistance from members who are still ringing up and wanting to place their licenses in writing or send in forms or complete documents offline. So whilst we're going to do our bit to encourage people more and more to become paperless, we are still finding pockets of strong resistance to people who are not wanting to embrace the technology. But we have got an absolute commitment to bring on the very things that you've talked about or have mentioned. But it does take time, it does take an investment in money, and it does take an investment in resources. And as we've said, the last 2 or 3 years have robbed us of many of those chances, but we are starting to see some more progress. And I promise throughout the year 2023, you'll see some improvements in some of those areas.
Thanks, huge. Next one is from Cameron McKinnon. The CEO has mentioned the importance of more tracks around the country. What is the board's position on the relicensing of Calder Park that has been heavily reported in the media?
I might comment first and then pass to Huge to comment further. In relation to Calder Park, the opportunity for Calder Park to be relicensed is based on a need for substantial investment, and it's been made very clear by the Victorian government that their priority is looking at a facility in and around Avalon, and we're committed to working with them. As we mentioned earlier, both Huge and I, and as everyone appreciates, building new facilities and the investment required to upgrade existing facilities or indeed expand them is a big task. It's beyond the balance sheet of just Motorsport Australia. We need to work with others to be able to secure that investment. And so in this instance, it's a very clear commitment from the Victorian government to explore a new facility out at Avalon, and we're committed to working with them. If we're able to secure that new facility, then I think that does provide a potential game changer for motorsport, not only locally in Victoria, but indeed a new national standard facility for the sport that can be accessed by people right around the country. But I'll ask Huge to comment further.
I guess the comment we have is that right now Calder Park does not hold a Motorsport Australia licence, track licence, and the primary reason for that is that the track isn't up to the standards that we require. So that's an opening comment, I guess, around Calder. We have spoken to Rod Jane. We know he knows our expectations. And ultimately, as Andrew said, the decision by the Victorian government to focus on Avalon really allows us to, well, forces us almost to focus on making sure that Avalon becomes a success. But as I said, it's very hard to engage when the track itself is not already licensed with Motorsport Australia. They've been told what they need to do to be able to bring it up to a standard where we can issue a track license. But as Andrew said, Avalon is an opportunity for us to really make an impact in the sport, a venue for the sport, run by the sport, which invests back in the sport. And again, in our view, an opportunity to give a template to other governments around the country to follow suit and also do the same. So I think the future lies in Avalon, to be brutally honest, and we're very excited about that opportunity.
Thanks, Huge. This next question from Simon Nicola might well be addressed to Andrew Westacott or his successor. Using Melbourne F1 as an example, where Outpost generated one large bag of waste each day, what initiatives are being looked at to, 1, reduce packing materials for officials' lunches, 2, potential to supply bottle collection points around Albert Park?
Thanks, Simon, and thanks for the observation. And they're good suggestions. Obviously, we work pretty closely with the Australian Grand Prix Corporation when it comes to the provision of officials for the Formula One Grand Prix at Albert Park. I would say this, and I have a role with the sport more broadly in terms of the Environmental and Sustainability Commission of the FIA. These are the sort of things where we're looking to implement global best practice. And so there are moves to incorporate environmental accreditation for both permanent and temporary facilities that host World Championship events, including Formula One. That's about including things such as reduction of waste at motorsport events. So your helpful and practical suggestions are ones that we'll raise with the Grand Prix Corporation, and obviously an ability to influence ourselves. But it is part of the broader move, both for us as a sport in Australia, but indeed for the sport internationally, to improve its environmental credentials. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Simon. Brenton O'Brien asks, how important do you see the future of esports with motorsport?
I might make a few comments and then Huge can. So one of the things I would say here is the provision the support that we provide to the sport around the country in its traditional forms. So ensuring that there's integrity, that officials are provided, that there's a set of records that are trusted by participants. That's the same sort of thing that we can offer to esports. So whether you're competing in an e-format or in a traditional format that we all love at a circuit or an off-road event, you expect the same things. And for us as an organisation, the ability to provide that to a new form of sport in terms of esports is an opportunity. But it's also worth thinking about it in this sense, and that is, if we decided it was not important, then someone else will. And as a sport and as a national sporting organisation, we shouldn't quickly give up the opportunity or provide the opportunity for another entity to come in and cover the field in that sense. So we see it as opportune. I don't envisage it outgrowing the traditional form of motorsport in the next little while, but we should also be careful and mindful to embrace the opportunities it has for particular growth. One of the things about our sport is it takes a fair bit to participate, both in terms of resources and time. What esports can do for motorsport is to lower that commitment, to make it easier for people who otherwise couldn't get involved to take part. And so we need to embrace that. It's an opportunity. It's not about to overwhelm the traditional forms of the motorsport, but it is a key aspect of how we see the sport developing in the future.
And we'd invite you to go and visit our website where the esports championships are now online. There's a whole series of dates already started, in fact, and right through to the end of the year, and they're all various forms of championships, GT and Formula Ford. So please visit our website and you can sign up and join any of the championships that are already available for you to join and participate in.
Thanks. Jeremy Cass has another question. Great to see the effort from Matt Wraith and team since the meeting this time last year. This portal has seen a lot of improvements, but the app seems to be still rather on hold. Does Motorsport Australia have the funding and resources it needs to maintain momentum, delivering technology to streamline processes and support clubs, promoters, events and officials?
We have the funds, but we have to balance that against the revenue and expense factor, and we have to be responsible about how we proceed, particularly around resourcing. I think this year we're spending upwards of $400,000 in a mixture of capital and software improvements, and always looking to improve on what we've already got. So, like I said earlier, we do caution a bit of patience. There is both a generational opportunity and change and education, and Matt will be doing another session during the year, in fact in a month or so, towards the end of this month, to again engage, because we are keen to hear from you about some of the changes we can implement. But it's not a simple flick of a switch. The event entry is a particularly important part of our engagement. The app will follow, it will become more interactive, but again, we want to be very careful and measured about how we introduce these changes. But we also need to meet our members halfway and ensure that they're educated about how they can take advantage. We've had a number of complaints from people about event entry where it actually does what they want to do, but they haven't worked out how to do it. So there's an education piece in that, and that's going to happen in the next month or so. So stay tuned and keep watching the advancements, but they are certainly a high priority.
Thanks, Hugh. Karen Bell has asked a two-part question, touching on what you've already addressed. What is being done to improve the MA portal for entries? As an event secretary, I have many members complaining about the site and it not being able to do their entries efficiently. On my side of this scenario, I'm actually entering people manually as well as trying to fix up classes. There's no one to go to enable to give feedback on the portal and whether anything would be done. And the second part is what is being done for club level motorsport. We're only hearing about top level, but we are fine. But what is keeping motorsport going?
Well, I'll take the second question first. Any perception that we do not care about grassroots or don't invest in grassroots is blatantly wrong. I promise you that I attend more grassroots events than I do supercars or other high-level events. That drive, 95% of our sport is driven from the grassroots. The big sports, the big parts of our sport contribute financially significantly to allow us to be able to invest back into the grassroots. So please don't ever think that we ignore our clubs or our grassroots sports. That's where I go most of the time. Secondly, with respect to the event entry, I often hear that very complaint that is partially driven by a lack of information from us as to how to best use event entry. But you call me tomorrow and I will put you onto Matt Wraith and he will spend the time, if necessary, helping you understand what event entry can do. The things you've mentioned it doesn't do, it should be doing, and it does do. It's certainly in part. So please reach out to me tomorrow. I'm easy to get, and I'll make sure that I can put you onto Matt. And I think you'll find that there might be some elements of event entry that we're still working on, but there are also some things that it's doing that you may not be aware of that or haven't been able to get to yet. So please contact me and I'll be happy to direct you to Matt.
Thanks, Huge. Stuart Fuchs asks, talking about older tracks, are there any plans for resurrecting Adelaide International Raceway, or is it in the same situation as Calder?
I think the latter comment is probably right. It's in the same situation as Calder in that it needs a bit of work. And obviously with the advent of Tailem Bend, which we were a part of that whole development in terms of working with Peregrine Corporation to identify the land and then support the development of that track. And the fact that Ballala is now starting to get some further investment from the Shaheen family suggests that there's no screaming demand for Adelaide International to be back online. If it's possible, as always, we will be happy to engage and try and find a way to get support for that track to be up and running. But I think the fact that we've got two very good tracks in South Australia meets the demand, but we'll always be happy to work on trying to find new venues or resuscitate or revive old venues. But it does take a bit of work from both the track operator, government and ourselves. And so we'll keep talking as much as possible in that vein.
A question from Alan Ainsworth. As a new official, I'm pleased to hear of additional opportunities for training. I'm also keen to understand pathways for advancement into more senior roles or alternative roles over time. This doesn't appear obvious from your published material.
Go on our website and you'll be able to get we've actually improved the sort of introduction to officiating. There's a video and there's information that is readily available that tracks a pathway. I guess the answer is go to events, become more involved, work with the club, and we'll be aware of you. We'll become aware of you because part of our commitment is to find the next generation of official as what we could call the older generation is starting to sort of move on, if you want to put it gently and politely. So the investment we're going to put into pathways, development of officials over the next 6 to 9 months will flesh out some of the opportunities that people like you can have to be able to progress. However, we do come across people who want to go to their first event as the Grand Prix. And we have to be mindful that there is a pathway, and that's almost a bit of a reward for those officials that have been supporting grassroots motorsport for many years. So the long, convoluted answer to your question is we are absolutely very keen to support people like you up the pathway. Our website is a really useful first step. There are modules. We are looking at introducing virtual training and other opportunities for people to become more proficient as officials, and going to events, talking to other officials, being mentored by officials are all opportunities that we believe exist at the moment, but we will enhance over the next few months with a revised plan on officiating.
I might just add to that answer, which is to say it's in part for individuals to, as this person has pointed out, as Alan, I think it was, seeking the pathway. But if I could just say to existing officials online and joining this, there's also an opportunity and indeed an obligation on all of us to spot those people or to identify those people who should be given an opportunity. So one answer to the question is as you pointed out, the pathways for the individual, but there's also the obligation on existing officials to provide the opportunity for those who are looking for it. And for all of us, that's in the interests of providing the next generation of officials to support the sport. So if I could provide that additional point, I think if we do both right, then we'll secure the future.
Thank you. Another officials question from Glenn Rochester. Will clubs be responsible for the training of new officials, or will this be done in conjunction with Motorsport Australia?
It's a good question, Ben, and my view would be we retain the primary responsibility for training officials, and clubs play a very important role. I've seen in my time that there are clubs that are really proactive, really forward thinking about making sure that their own membership are new officials and are supported as officials. So for us, it's a bit of you and a bit of us, but it's our responsibility. And as I mentioned, there are some clubs that are happy to leave it to us, and we've got the capacity to certainly train and educate and develop our officials. But I do believe that clubs play an important role where they choose to do so to actually support those programs. And invariably, our officials do come out of clubland. There are certainly more that I've seen in my experience coming out of clubland. And what better way to become or learn to become an official than be in a club environment? So, and this sort of goes back to the previous comment, or one of the previous comments around grassroots. Let there be no mistake, grassroots motorsport is all about motorsport as far as we're concerned. The big end sport, the big end of town, if we want to call it that, is a useful part and a very important part of our matrix, but grassroots is what drives our sport. So please be mindful that we are very supportive of that pathway and a mixture of club support, but it's our responsibility to make sure that people wearing our tops, wearing our uniforms, doing our work are representative of this organisation.
Andrew Nordstrom asks, talking of tracks, what about tracks in southeast Queensland, Yatala, for example?
Any given day, Andrew?
Yeah, Andrew.
Any given day, Andrew, there are probably 14 or 15 developments around the country that are in play. And as I mentioned with respect to Drive at NQ, it takes a lot of work and commitment and passion by the locals to work with us and government. So I've heard of, I certainly know about Yatala, and I certainly know about Ringwood, and I know about the Circuit d'Italia, which some of you would know, in New South Wales and around Queensland. Pleasingly, I think Queensland Raceway coming back online, Morgan Park also getting support and becoming more associated with us at Motorsport Australia as an opportunity for us to help them develop the venue. But as I mentioned, in any given month or day or week, there are 13 or 14 developments that are either in their infancy or may have actually run out of steam, and we'll just continue to look at those opportunities wherever they are. So yeah, I don't know that I've actually fully answered your question, but we do know about these venues. We are looking at them all the time, and where we can, we do help.
A couple more venue ones. From Rick Shaw, what is happening with Wakefield Park in New South Wales? How's Motorsport going to get it open? Are you working with the new owner to help?
We are. He's already reached out to us. I think it's Steve Shelley, if I'm not mistaken, who owns Pheasant Wood, and he's already made contact with us. In fact, we've made contact with him. He is the new owner of Wakefield Park. He's got some great plans around investing and extending the track. As I mentioned earlier, Andrew and I hope to meet with the Sports Minister in the not too distant future, the newly appointed Sports Minister, to give him a bit of a sort of overview of sport in New South Wales and the missed opportunity, if you would say, by not investing in more venues and more tracks. And Wakefield is certainly uppermost in our mind. It's already there. The locals broadly support it. There have been some issues around noise. Steve is committed to improving on that issue, and we're certainly going to be working with him. And as I said, we've reached out to him. We were active prior to the government or prior to the election. We worked with both the local MP and also the opposition MP, and we'll continue to do that with Wakefield, because one major track in New South Wales is simply not enough. So we'll continue working on that. Rick?
Thanks. And Duan Palmer asked, do you think that you guys will ever revive the Canberra 400?
Well, it's not our call as Motorsport Australia, and definitely one for supercars, but obviously the Canberra 400, like any street circuit event, requires significant support from the state, or in this case, the Territory Government. I know from talking to the Chief Minister there, Andrew Barr, he is keen on events in Canberra, but I'm not sure that the Canberra 400 is in their immediate priorities.
Okay. I've got a question from Cameron McKinnon, I think for you, Charlotte. But Cameron, could you ask the question? It says, looking at income pie graph displayed earlier, the majority of Motorsport Australia's income comes from licenses and events. So I'm not sure that there's a question there yet. So if you want to resubmit, Cameron, that'd be great. And while we wait for that, Matt Disanowski, how does Motorsport Australia respond to claims grassroots and club level members feel left alone, forgotten and ripped off?
I don't know how they feel ripped off. Rob Roy received $500,000, or the MG Car Club essentially received $500,000 to be able to resurface for track at Rob Roy, one of the oldest hill climbs in the world, which is run by a club. And we did a lot of heavy lifting with the Rob Roy committee. Our regional development executives are as active as they've ever been in terms of engaging with clubs. But I mentioned before, it's a bit of a two-way street. We can certainly put out on Speed Read, on our website. And I remember vividly in Victoria, we had to ring the clubs to encourage them to make applications to get $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 grants. So I'm not being critical of the clubs. We are here to serve you, but please don't ever think that we ignore the grassroots, because most of the heavy lifting has been done in the last 2 years, particularly through the pandemic. We received emergency funding that was fed out to clubs in nearly every state impacted by the lockdowns. So there is this perception. You can call me anytime. You can call any of our members or any of our staff anytime with any issue around clubs. And many of the club presidents know me by name, huge, because we do get out there and we do want to see them, and we do want to support them. So please reach out if you've got a club that you're involved in that is feeling a little bit left out. We'll be very happy to try and engage for you and do whatever you need us to do to get more members, more officials, or improve your venue. Our track record over the last 2 years suggests that we've got the formula right as far as doing that, and we're very keen to keep that going.
Thanks. We have more time, so please send in some more questions. This one is from Steve Brumby. The evolution of non-speed licenses has impacted on grassroots motorsport, forcing entry-level event competitors to have to pay more just to participate in the basics such as Motorcana and touring rallies. What was the driver behind this decision?
There were a number of reasons for it. The primary reason was that we rationalised some 40 different licences into about 11, make it much easier from an administrative point of view to be able to actually manage the sport more efficiently. But we found that the non-speed licences were actually not engaging in the way that we thought. Many people would use them once and not actually participate in the sport further. By paying a lesser amount, the commitment is not as great. I think at $135, a speed licence is pretty good value compared to many other things we buy in our ordinary everyday life. It was a rationalisation. We haven't seen the drop-off that has been claimed as a result of the non-speed or the one-day licences not being available. And so, again, there's sometimes a perception and reality. As you can see from the numbers that we've presented tonight, post-pandemic, we're starting to get back up to the numbers we had at record levels in 2019. And I do remember a lot of our members and clubs would complain about the red tape and the complicated level of licensing that we had. We've simplified it, and that simplification is actually working to our advantage. There are still some people who want to go back to the past and bring in non-speeds or one-day licenses. There are health, legal and insurance issues around being able to provide people with licenses for a full year that are at a certain level, as opposed to sort of temporary licenses, if you want to call them that. So again, it's a long answer to your question, but we've made the commitment, we've seen the results, we know we've made the right decision, and we want to keep people in the sport for the long term. And I think a modest spend on $135 for a speed license is relatively cheap compared to the expenses that many other people use when they're actually out there competing. And I think one thing that many members may not know is that our licenses not only give you the right to go and compete, but they also provide valuable insurance protection and cover. And that's a pretty important element of our sport, even though we don't want any accidents. If they do happen, you have the knowledge and protection of knowing that there's a no-fault accident compensation scheme sitting behind our license. Very important part of what we do.
Thanks, Huge. Mark Campbell. Will Motorsport Australia be creating a consultative committee to advise or have input into the proposed development at Avalon? And if so, will that committee embrace all levels of motorsport participation and not just be the premier classes?
So I think this would be an important bridge to cross in the future. We are very hopeful that Avalon will come to fruition, but we are at the stage of developing the business case for it with support from the Victorian government. If we are at the point where the project is going to be funded into the future, then no doubt the opportunity for a range of stakeholders to provide input, including from different levels of the sport, is something that we would take on board. Huge, as the CEO, has been at the forefront of that, and I'm sure without wanting to get ahead of ourselves and banking something that still the work's got to be done on, if it is the case that the project is going to proceed, then naturally we'd be looking to get input from different parts of the sport.
Yep, not surprisingly, I've already had a number of members reach out and send their CVs on the prospect of being able to assist us, and there's no doubt a benefit in having people involved in the sport being available to us at various times. But we are very much at the start of a very important journey, and we have used our consultation in the past and we'll use it again in the future when the opportunity arises.
Thanks. Trevor Allen, what is the future plan of Motorsport Australia working with Speedway Australia going forward?
Well, after a 4 or 5 year period of non-contact, pleasingly Speedway came back into the fold. They were a delegate of ours back in 2014 and 15, and as a result of what we would call governance issues, they moved away from us. Pleasingly, Darren Tyndall, the new general manager or CEO of Speedway, and the president reached out to us middle of last year, and they're back in the fold. And importantly, they're a part of the Australian Motorsport Council, which is a sort of national group that covers motorbikes, cars, speedway, drags, and karting. We regularly now work with Darren and his team, providing them some advice, assistance, policies, even lobbying. So I think the response to the answer is very strong, very solid, ongoing, growing, and hopefully there'll be a benefit to Speedway in years to come.
Thanks, Huge. Peter Helwig, I was wondering if you had any plans from moving from a calendar year licence to a 12-month from a renewal licence like we have with our normal driver's licences?
We haven't had ours are, well, the licenses we issue are all on calendar, sorry, all on renewals. So if you renew in February, it goes through to February next year. The only licenses that are a full calendar year, which are from January to December, are international licenses. Our members like the, if you want to call it, the flexibility of being able to join in a certain month and have a license for 12 months. The inevitable consequence of having a 1st of January to 31st of December license is that if you join in June, you only get half the value, even though you're paying for a full price. So I think that was the question. But for as long as I've been the CEO, in fact, well before me, we've had renewals based on the month you join and the month you sign up. That'll continue.
Thanks. Mark Thompson, is there going to be a significant investment into digital training programs and the updating of the existing official training programs? I understand there is a move to have most of the courses to be held online, leading to the evolution of face-to-face programs. Also, is there going to be investment in the senior officials program throughout Australia?
Yes, sorry.
No, well, I'll pass to Eugene in a moment, but I think the answer here is In the past, it was all face-to-face, and then the pandemic obviously forced everything online. There is a happy point between those two, and that is we can obviously reach a lot more people online at a much lower cost. But for senior officials programs, the ability to have practical training, i.e. face-to-face training, whether it's here at the Motorsport Australia headquarters in Canterbury, or indeed at particular circuits or tracks around the country, has to form part of what officials, an absolute gold standard officials training program can look to into the future. As I foreshadowed at the start, we're looking at what investments we can make as a sport to support the development of officials with improvements in that training program. So the short answer is you can expect to see both in the future, but it's work that's underway. So it's a bit of a watch this space for future developments in coming months and over the next year. But Huge might like to add to that.
I'll just add a little bit on that. One of the key drivers for us engaging with government around Avalon was our commitment to build a centre of excellence which would host both international and local training of our officials. What a great opportunity it would be to have our own home outside of this office where we can take someone to a track that's controlled by us and actually have live training. But as Andrew said, there's a happy medium between video and in-face. And I guess coming out of the last 3 years, we've been forced to do more video, of course, but our ambitions are to have more face-to-face than we've had over the last couple of years and get back to that happy balance that Andrew mentioned. But in utopia, in our dream, in our ambition, is to have a home of motorsport with a leading world-class centre of excellence, not only for driver training, elite driver training, young driver training, but officials training. It'll be something that hopefully we'll be very proud of and be able to showcase to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Huge. Well, thank you everybody for your questions this evening and for joining us at this third annual event. I'm sure we'll be back next year by popular demand, but otherwise thank you to our President, Andrew Fraser, our CEO, Eugenia Rocker, and our CFO, Charlotte Hayes, who's obviously done a great job, no questions. And thank you again for coming and good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.